This is the Open University, a synthetic and mendacious open university devised by Momus.
I tend to fall asleep listening to vintage BBC radio productions on Radio 4 Extra. Or I did until this week, because actually suddenly the BBC has terminated foreign access to its player for everything except Radio 4 and the World Service, which is typical and joins the sapping and ebbing away of British soft power alongside things like the disappearance of Marks and Spencer and Habitat from Paris. But this time it hits me quite hard, because I tend to use the iPlayer, or Sounds as it's been called recently, to get my fix of old Frankie Howard and Much Binding in the Marsh shows, vintage British comedy, as I'm falling asleep. In fact, I can't really fall asleep without it. But actually, then again, I've been replacing the Beeb recently with Clarice Lispector audiobooks and conversations on YouTube between John Cage and Morton Feldman. So I suppose I'm upping the ante a bit. Anyway, in this particular day last week, I heard some production, which I can't even research. I can't even tell you what it was, because the website's no longer there, of a 1920s drama, and it was using Charleston-type jazz music, and I decided to sample the jazz. And this is an instance of the video preceding the song, because I also had a nice clip from a 1975 BBC Horizon film about the physiological effects of music. It's called Muzak and Your Mind, 1975. And that showed a bouncing ball ascending an Escherian impossible staircase. MC Escher, he's so clever. And I spent ages getting the bounce in time with the 1920s samples. And a bit like the Jobriath interludes in Car Crash Man, this one had a slow, fast, slow structure. So you get a moody person wondering what he's there for, and then suddenly you're in this jolly, brassy interlude. And I imagined a transition in like a 1960s rom-com, maybe a Godard film, Belmondo suddenly deciding to amuse Anna Karina with a little spoof on a silent movie. The narrator takes on the role of a rubber ball, who just wants to be small and bouncy and cheerful and amuse his girlfriend, but as the song progresses he gets more cynical and power-mad. It almost sounds as if a proto-life form like ChatGPT is talking, going from an amusing gimmick to something that wants to run the world and berates humans for their blind stupidity and trusting him. I actually took this off the album, this track, for a while, considering it annoying and anomalous, like a novelty song. But people's positive comments about it, and plus a minor remix, I just redid the front bit without the pitch shift, made me like it again, so it's back on. Audrec, the name, it comes from a strange bobbin-like creature in a Kafka story. And in fact, there's another Kafka story called To Bloomfeld, an Elderly Bachelor, about an old man who comes home to his flat and finds a couple of bouncing balls there, a kind of weird supernatural character. Kafka's full of cute presences, comforting oddities, anomalies. Maybe like a literary version of Paul Klee with his twittering machine. So that's that one. The next one in the sequence of 7, Randomness. So this started with a sample of a clanky Beefheartian rhythm from the cult 60s song called Machines by Lothar and the Hand People, who I'd never heard of, but somebody posted it online. And actually, you could probably update the song Machines very easily now, because it's about how machines are built to serve us, but we end up becoming their slaves. But my song doesn't really continue that theme, although it could have done, since this is my post-AI album. My lyric starts with the title of John Cage's 1960s diary, How to Improve the World, brackets, you will only make matters worse. So I love that paradox. And the Cage diary, it's a lot about Buckminster Fuller and various utopian ideas that Cage was encountering in the 1960s. But it's the tension in the title that interests me, the paradoxical coexistence of a desire to improve things with the sense that utopias can easily turn into hells. So Cage was like a Buddhism-influenced anarchist. He wasn't a communist. So this is another take on the activism theme. By all means produce ideas which might improve things, the geodesic dome, for instance, of Buckminster Fuller, but be aware of things like unintended consequences and chance operations. On history. The middle verse about sparrows flying into a cafe and stealing people's cake is something that really happened in Bonanza. I try to go out every day when I'm recording to cafes and just sit there on my own, a forlorn figure sipping at an iced latte. But I'm always soaking up everything that's happening around me. So somehow everybody was brought together by this little instance of cheeky theft. And musically, I took the chords in randomness, almost randomly, in random directions, and tried to make something coherent, if a bit twisting and tendentious, melodically over them. So it becomes a sort of hymn with my Korg monopoly making semi-random noises and various defamiliarization techniques, making the musical color unpredictable. This album's very much about timbre, musical color, or what one Eno scholar called the vertical color of sound. I went back and remixed this song, giving it more of a Baroque chug with some nice ambiguity, some nice tension between major and minor scales, and some discordant piano over the fade. And I also restored the Lothar and the Hand People rhythm. The next track is Eat the Disease, ended up being called Eat the Disease, which apparently is like a heavy metal song called that, of course. I started this with the idea of making a track like something off Matt Johnson's Burning Blue Soul album. I really love early Matt Johnson. The. So there had to be a flanging kind of effect on synth guitar lines. There was an accordion. There wasn't Jules Holland doing honky-tonk piano, but, I did attempt it. And, of course, the Matt's own growly kind of disillusioned existentialist vocals snarling out in a soulful way. That's how I had pictured it in advance anyway, but when I wrote the lyric, imagining Matt singing it, and then tried to sing it that way myself, it just didn't work. Also, I couldn't play piano like Jules Holland on my tiny computer keypad. I don't even have a MIDI controller keyboard anymore. I haven't had one for about a decade, so I just tap out my compositions on the laptop keyboard, like A, W, D. It's actually quite easy to remember sequences of notes if you remember the letters. So it turned out rather different than I'd imagined, but it kept this syncopated swing beat. Somebody referred to it in the comments as the 2 feel, because it's the 2-bar feel, emphasizing short 2-bar sections rather than 4s. I just call it jazzy and syncopated. So I sang the song as a kind of duet with myself, and that's something I first did on the track London 1888, back in, I think, 1993 I wrote that. Mainly because I didn't have time to breathe between the lyrics. There's so many lines crammed in next to each other, so close. Sherlock Holmes is my good friend, I have a trust fund I can spend, all that stuff. It was easier with 2 voices. So I did that again this time, and the lyrics about coexisting with whatever is lurking nearby, ready to kill you, your disease, which is in the shadows, especially when you get to my age. There is something in the shadows which is going to jump out like an assassin. And I think the illustrations from Matt's early albums may have influenced the lyric as well. Those were made by Andy Dog Johnson, who's Matt's brother. And the video uses The Mask, which is an episode from the 1960 TV show called One Step Beyond, which I only now realize is what they were shouting out in Madness in the early days, references to that. One step beyond! I don't know how they remembered that, because it was from the very early 60s, and they're about my age too. The masked character looks a bit like the late Bowie videos, where he's got this bandage around his face and kind of little buttons for his eyes, and he called the character Button Eyes. Next track is Busted, and this was a huge epic to work on. I started with some guitar samples in the Apple Loops library, and you can shift those through every key. So I sampled shifted versions of a basic strumming figure in many keys, almost randomly saving them to my desktop, and then I sculpted that into a new chord sequence, and it started sounding a bit like the Cocteau Twins because of the flanging effect I put on the guitars. I was even going to call the track 4AD at one point, because it was it could have been modern English or somebody as well. And the lyric, which kind of occurred to me, was really in the style of Mark Bolan or Lou Reed, when they have a type of song where they list a bunch of characters and give one line to each character. So it's like things like Bobby's all right, he's a natural born poet, he's just out of sight, or Little Joe never once gave it away, everybody had to pay and pay. These little cameos that, so you can have a cast of 25 people in a song, which is great if they're all Warhol factory figures and things like that, but mine were just imaginary. And I published the song like that. It was called Norman Normal, and people liked it, but I felt like it didn't really have enough focus, so I rewrote it from just one person's point of view, and it's a guy who's figuratively been sent to a relationship jail for making a pass at some girl. I don't personally talk about being handed my ass or busted or bail bonds. These are way too American expressions for me, so I guess it's an American person. And in a certain sense, it could be on another level about Trump being busted, having his ass handed to him, whatever that means, for the Epstein stuff, his proximity, which is an ongoing scandal. Who knows? Let's hope it can be the thing to take him down. But when I carved together a new mix of these more direct and universal lyrics with the middle sections from the original, it made something more powerful, more interesting. So Norman Normal transformed into Busted, and apparently the Stranglers also have a song called Norman Normal, so it's okay with that B-side. Not terribly impressive, actually, their song. But it was good to move on from. The video is me performing the song in a ship's captain's top I bought in Bruges, and actually mined to the new lyrics the next day in the same costume, so there was some continuity fluffs, like the bathroom door being in a different position and stuff. There is a Sondheim reference with the phone rings, door chimes, in comes company, or I sing, in comes somebody. I actually went off and listened to the original Broadway cast recording of Company and was totally impressed. Beautiful music and arrangements. And the video undercuts my bedroom dancing with deranged celebrity photographs by Diane Arbus. I particularly like her images of Borges, Auden, and Tiny Tim. The next track is beautiful When Angry, and this started with my Grabber Rog reed organ, which also spawned songs like Mr. Consistency and Little Paper Humans. Basically, I made a click track and then I pushed the chords buttons in fairly random ways. When I had about 10 minutes of that, I cut and pasted my favorite chords into something I liked. And the lyric reflected the Berlin weather, because it's thunder and rain every day here. I think Europe is having a kind of rainy season these days. The idea of loving that violence of thunderstorms allied itself to the old cliche, you're beautiful when you're angry. And then I added, will you marry me, for emphasis. And the rainy symbol in the video behind me was something I saw in the Berlin Biennale, because I'm trying to go out to see art as well as making this record. And I added lots of green screen rain effects, splattering, as if I'm sort of behind a sheet of glass on a rainy day. The arrangement cuts back and forth between several mixes and plays on the contrast between hesitant verses and a certain, more certain kind of chorus. And I'm doing a lot of sculpting in Audacity, which is the post-production kind of software I use, getting mixes, different mixes, and then often kind of cross-fading them together in ways which are exciting to me. The next track was called Mr. Young Men, and I felt as if I hadn't made good on the poppy promise of Car Crash Man. So I went back to Hosono, since that was based on samples from a Miharu Koshi track, and this one I went to something from his commercial music box, which I loved. Hosono, of course, is the last remaining member of Yellow Magic Orchestra. He's very much out and about just now in Europe, doing DJ sets in Paris and funny walks in London at his concerts. He's fairly old, he's in his 80s now. I love his mid-1980s quirky techno programming, so this song relies heavily on samples. And interestingly, by disavowing AI, I've gone back to older ways to incorporate alien material into my songs. Turntables and samplers from the 90s, that was what we did in the 90s. So I had the title Mr. Young Men in mind ever since seeing an okonomiyaki restaurant on the main mall in Kyoto, which calls itself Mr. Young Men and was established in 1976. And you see that really 70s graphic design that they still have. I love these stilted Japanese commercial uses of English. Witness the song Beautiful Human Life on Yikes. Mr. Young Men turns into the gayest anthem imaginable. The narrator is sort of Peter Pan meets Dorian Gray character who time travels in the sense that he's preserved his youth, but this actually looks odd to real young people around him because he's a youth from 1983 rather than a youth from now. And in a sense, this is what happens when you age. Old people today don't look like old people when we were young, who tended to, they had flat caps and tea cozies for headgear. Old age now is connoted by a look we, old people, associate with youth. But the youth of today associates with age. So that's leaving aside the question of whether there's been convergence. Maybe both old and young people wear athleisure, in which case the differentiation is still there. It just moves to more subtle details of cut, positioning, what angle your cap's at rather than whether you wear a baseball cap. So I suppose there's something a bit Austin Powers about all this. And the song references Back to the Future, which is a sci-fi film I've never seen, but I don't really feel the need to. It's like out there in the folklore of our time. And the DeLorean time machine is now a retro wormhole to the 1980s, this idea of what the future would be, certainly not what it turned out to be. Video splices me into a 2025 Comme des Garçons shirt show in which all the boys wear Rei Kawakubo style wigs. And somebody asks in the comments whether Rei herself might be a Momus fan. I would love her to be. I'm certainly a fan of her. The last touch on this was to add some sound effects, which are mostly taken from a Morton Feldman piano piece dedicated to the painter Philip Guston. And I've been using those for years, these same kind of dissonant piano chords, which they just work like MSG. On any track I put them into, I love them. I love the kind of esoteric sound they have. And I treated some of those piano chords in this track so that they sound like whale cries and things, put them through a lot of pitch shifting and processing so that they no longer sound anything like a piano. There's also some wooden recorder in there. I think wooden recorders sound much nicer than plastic ones, and they always have this plaintive quality. Anyone's Guess is the last track on the album and also the latest one I've made. So when I'm making an album, it's fair to say that I'm living, eating and sleeping music. I tend to devour documentaries about music makers and old interviews, obscure tracks, and read old reviews. And there's a really good series on YouTube about British singles from the 1960s. The channel's called Yesterday's Papers. Incredibly well researched with clips of bands being discussed, extensive readings from the press reviews at the time, old bits of Top of the Pops. There was an episode set in 1965 which included an entrancing snatch of a B-side by the Zombies called I Must Move, written by the band's bass player. And I didn't know much about the Zombies, although I did sample their big hit Time of the Season for my 1991 song Blue Stocking. The chords in I Must Move provided my starting point here, and I tried to imagine where they might have gone if they'd run much longer in a similar style, of sort of subtle shifts in key within the verse structure. So the lyric takes a cue from the sort of Leonard Cohen song where he might be praying to God to give him a peaceful death, or equally well, asking a girl if he can sleep with her. When you get to my age, you do see a narrative arc emerging for your life, and it's often at odds with the plot line you might have liked, or the unreliable and perhaps forgettable subtlety of what actually happened in your life. So it's another song about success and failure, like The Blonde Beast. I'd been sifting through old letters, throwing some out. In the Berlin flat I like to call the Museum of Me, which I'm having to leave now because I don't have enough money to keep paying for this place, or for a place I'm only in for a couple of months a year. It's been a bit of a luxury to have it. When I'm most of the time in Paris anyway. So the video is just a simple performance with a guitar. Somebody complained on the Mr. Young video saying, oh, I wish Momus would foreground the music rather than the visuals. So this one I'm just sitting there with my guitar. It was really hard to make a realistic series of guitar chord shapes. I had a guitar part for the song, but I couldn't be playing it and singing the lyrics because I tend to mime a song always a line behind. So I know what the next line is coming up, and that's really hard to make work with the guitar hand at the same time. And so we come to the end of another Momus album. I think it's finished unless the Columbo rule applies, the one more thing syndrome. Who knows? I've enjoyed getting back to full-on composition now, even if sampling and outright theft make it a sort of level playing field in the end. And I think I've been quite sentimental this time, even shedding tears when I finish a song I find successful and beautiful, like the Anyone's Guess song. In a strange way, it feels like I made this as if it were the last Momus album. No particular reason, but it just felt like the ending of something because of leaving the flat, perhaps. So it feels quite serious and heavy, but also beautiful, like a sort of final flourish of the peacock's tail of my themes, a credo, a series of secular hymns. And what it might lack in playful lightness and silliness, there's nothing here like the Beckmans or the Poet or Friends. It makes up for with strong emotions and beautiful musical colours. And I think timbre has been very important in this album, just the colour of the sound. Do listen with headphones because some of the textures and timbres deserve and require that. And I'll see you next time.
Open University.